Ooby-doo, it's everyone's favorite boomer and vintage lens enthusiast. Today we're going to look at Auto TAKUMAR f1.8 55mm Asaya Optical Company, Japan. This is a screw mount lens, right? It has a window for the depth for the distance scale. It focuses down to less than 1.5 feet or 0.45 meters. It only stops down to f16 and half f-stops. Wow, that's cool. It has this MA switch, and in manual mode, well, you gotta have it in manual or else the aperture blades won't stop down correctly. See how it didn't go down all the way? So if you put it in manual mode, then it stops down correctly. So that's good to know. Of course, this is a dumb lens and a dumb adapter, but that doesn't mean it's stupid. You can see there's a big dent here in the filter ring. I got this with a H3 Pentax body someone gave to me because it got dropped. And the guy was a repairman, but he didn't want to fix it. He worked for a different company. So the person who owned the camera didn't want it, and he gave the camera to me. And the camera worked a little bit, but then it sort of died. I put some that carbon lubrication in it, and it worked for a while. But since it got dropped, and it got dropped real hard, there's a whole bunch of gears and levers inside those old film cameras, and it just gave up the ghost. And it had something wrong with the shutter too. So I kept this lens all these years, and I do have a Pentax Spot SP500, Spotmatic 500, and that's a M42 screw mount, but that's neither here nor there. This thing is ancient. I don't know how ancient it is, but it's very ancient. It's probably 60 years old at least. Aside for this dent, the optics are clean, really clean. And there's no other damage that I could tell. It's all old school, all metal. The focusing ring is buttery smooth with no backlash or anything. So it has all that going for it. So I'm doing a series of 50 millimeters, and especially the Pentax line. And we just see, are these any good? Now, a damaged lens like this, even if everything else is perfect, you could probably get it for $5 or talk someone down, you know, and it'd be well worth it. Because in excellent, like new condition, I guess they're worth $100 easy. But they made Brazilians of these at the time. You know, every camera came with a 50 millimeter lens. So and they were using them as body caps. Basically, you buy a body and they just throw a lens on it to get rid of them. But now they're still around. Yeah, like I said. And the thing is, back in the day, photography was so complicated. You had to set all these numbers yourself. There's no autofocus. You had to focus yourself. A shutter, you had to set the shutter speed yourself. You had to do everything yourself. So a lot of people, it was just too complicated for them. Even with the metering, you know, they had meters to help you along, but it's just too complicated. People just didn't do it. So a lot of these cameras, they just laid fallow for years, or they got dropped and that was it. That's a really, really bad dent. That's a really, really bad dent. And so I ran it through the paces. Oh, today is Friday the 13th came on Saturday this month. It's April 13th to Saturday, but just because that happened, you still got to be careful. You know, Friday the 13th, sometimes it comes on a Saturday. So just keep that in mind. So I was lucky because it's April and it was sort of cooled off and it was rainy and windy after a couple of pleasant days. And so I went to the park after I went to the supermarket, and there's like only 3 cars in the park. So I was able to take my usual jaunt around the lake and down by the creek, and there was nobody there except when I was leaving. I saw there's a few people around. So at least I had that going for me. And all I gotta say, this is one of those nice lenses. I did another 50mm f2 that got dropped, and didn't get dropped as much as this one, although it had slight dent here, and it hit the focusing ring, and I had to tap the focusing ring in so it would work. But this one doesn't suffer from that, as this has a really bad dent here. This is on the camera. It dropped while it was on the camera. It got whacked here. The camera's kaput. I just chucked it out. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. So, but I kept this lens. And these guys, these samurai from Japan, made these lenses so good, you could stick it on a 24 megapixel mirrorless camera and get outstanding results. Outstanding results. Say this is a 6-element lens. Every lens has a special curve of it. Most of them are convex, but some of them are concave, and some of them are cemented together. And every surface of this lens has to be within millionths of an inch. Millionths of an inch, so in order to get an excellent image. And, well, I don't know what they did, but they did it right. So this thing got whacked, but none of the elements got off-centered or tilted or anything like that. I shot most of the images I shot at f8, because on these mirrorless cameras, they could detect diffraction. That is, the smaller aperture and that hole gets, you get diffraction effects where the light refracts more around that little aperture there. So f8 is usually the ideal aperture for taking photography on mirrorless cameras. Although in a pinch I'll use f11 or 16 when I need a lot of depth of field. So I shot most of the shots at f8, and I shot some at f1.8 because it was a cloudy day out, and of course I had to use a slow ISO 100. I was using a shutter speed of like 1600, but I was able to take a couple of pictures at f1.8. Of course, the depth of field is extremely shallow at f1.8, but you could still tell that this thing worked really good. And at f16, I took a couple pictures at f16 because I wanted to do, a somewhat longer exposure for running water. So I still used ISO 100, f16. I was using maybe a 15th of a second, to get that motion blur of the water. But and then I was using ISO 400 at f8, 500th of a second, something like that. So at the park, just the usual stuff. Now, this park I live in is only like a 12-minute drive from where I live. And it's a really nice park. And it's quaint, it's pleasant, It's not like outstanding like the Grand Tetons or the Palisades or big deserts. It's just a park with some rolling hills and boulders and trees and creeks and stuff like that. And it's a telephoto lens. I call these lenses telephoto lens. There's a blackbird in the reeds, and I was able to focus on him, and I waited for him to fly away. I was able to snap a picture as he's flying away, and we're going to see that in a slideshow. And it's a really, really excellent lens, even though it was damaged. I don't know what makes these lenses bad then. I mean, if this lens is still good after that severe damage there, you can't put a filter on that anymore. I guess you could tap it out, but I don't feel like it. Man, I say go to garage sales, go to thrift stores, go to flea markets. You can always go to camera stores and see if they got a used section. And then, if it functions fully, you just look at the aperture and all that. Make sure there's no separation of the glass elements or chips or cracks in there or excessive dust or anything. And then you just talk them down and say, oh, look how beat that is. I'm taking a gamble on it. Maybe you get it for $5 or $10 or, some low amount of money like that. I could recommend this lens. This is a really nice lens. And that's another thing. Everyone knows I'm a Canon guy. But when I was a young man and I had some spare bucks and I couldn't afford Nikon or Canon gear, so I went Pentax. Why did I get Pentax? Pentax was my third banana, and they were somewhat cheaper. And even on the used market, they were cheap. And so I went Pentax. And they make a lot of good stuff. They have a couple of dogs, there's no doubt about it. But even Canon and Nikon, they have some dogs, and I've owned some of them, and I know about it. So, but most of their stuff, like their 50 millimeters, are outstanding. And I mentioned this before, but I hated 50 millimeters. You know, 50 millimeters are useless. Maybe for low light photography because they always had a fast F number like F2 or 1.8 or something. But other than that, I couldn't see what uses they have for them. Although the Pentax line, they always focus pretty close. You know, 1.5 feet, that's pretty close for a 50 millimeter. If you were to stick a 2x lens extender on it, and it would turn into 100 millimeter, it doesn't affect your closest focusing. I also have another 50 millimeter f2 that's radioactive. So I have a newer K-mount lens. I have this old one that's a M42 screw mount. And I also have another 50 millimeter that has a radioactive rear element. I didn't know it at the time, but as I did research into it, you know, they're usually got the yellowed, because they're so old, the radioactivity turns this rear element yellow. And this is not the case in this one. There's nothing wrong with this one. So what you do is you stick the lens under some ultraviolet light for 3 days and it clears it up. So what I'm doing is doing this series of 50 millimeters to see what's what. And it looks to me like, you know, they're all fine performers, even when they've got some heavy damage like this. I can highly recommend this, without a doubt, without a doubt. You know, that's not to say that there's some that are bad, and you're always going to take a gamble when you buy a damaged lens because you don't know what the damage could do to the lens somehow. But I got lucky. I got a 50 millimeter f2, that's a fine performer, and then I got this old beast, which is still a fine performer. But let's jump right into the slideshow, and then you decide. I could never figure out why I didn't get rid of this lens. I must have had it for like 20 years, just kicking around. And even when I got a Spotmatic SP500 body, I never really used it. It was more to wide angles or telephotos. And well, I finally got into mirrorless cameras. I want to say a word about the Sony Alpha 5000 or A5000. I bought a Alpha 5500, brand new, old stock, for $380 because the 6000 series came out, which has a eye-level electronic viewfinder. So everyone was dumping the 5000 series, and you could pick up a 5000 brand freaking new looking like for 125 bucks. Well, now they're a little bit more, and they're a match made in heaven. The 5000 is 20 megapixels. The adapters are dirt cheap. I slapped this lens on. I was totally amazed with it. Totally amazed with it. And I went to the park, and I went there specifically because it was overcast that day. And there's a wide range of contrast, and there's no like harsh, highs and lows. And you can see the fine detail in between. And you got to remember, this lens was dropped. It was dropped, horribly dropped. It was dropped on the camera, and it destroyed the camera, right? The gears and levers got all messed up on the inside, but this lens still puts out. And how old is it? 60 years old? When was it made? In the 50s or early 60s or something? It's amazing. To buy a piece of optical equipment that old, and the glass is clear, and I'm glad I kept it. It's a really, really nice lens. Does a really, really great job. It's got nice colors. It's got nice sharpness. Got a nice range over everything. And you could see in these B pictures, like the branches, how sharp they are, in the corners. Here's this blackbird. That's a 1-to-1 crop. Snapped his picture. That's pretty slick, ain't it? So it's a telephoto lens. Even if it's a 50 millimeter. A 50 millimeter on a crop sensor is like a 75 millimeter, but it's even more of a telephoto because you could crop it and get close-ups. I was very pleased with the results of this lens, and I got put in my rotation to use it more. So if you could find one cheap somewhere, this in your travels, pick one up. It's worth it. Just look through the lens, make sure there's no dust or fungus. There's no separate elements or anything like that. And then if you get it at $5 or $10, it's worth taking a gamble. It really is. Of course, if you want to get a perfect specimen, even perfect specimens are $100 because they made millions of them back in the day. But this is a random sample that was dropped, and it still has outstanding contrast and sharpness. And compared to other lenses I have, it's really, really a nice lens. Yeah, Pentax, they were a third string banana company, but you know, they made excellent optics without a doubt, and some good cameras too, without a doubt. And you know, just don't be afraid to get one. That's all there is. Maybe you could get one for free. Someone's got one and say, hey, I know you're in photography, you want this, and that's even the best way to get it. These forsythias in the background, you know, there's some color in a gray, bland day. And here's a sign. This is one of my standards I use. And let's check out how nice and sharp this is. That's nice and sharp. Doesn't get any better than that. A really, 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 really nice lens. Go get one.